Chill, Colorado. That's right. My name is Kevin Owocki. I am, I am a co-founder of the Gitcoin project, which is focused on open source sustainability, and that's what my talk is about today. I would not be here if it were not for Consensus, first of all, who has been backing Gitcoin for the last year and a half. Very happy to have access to their network of talented mentors and entrepreneurs, and also the support of the Boulder blockchain community, of which I am a co-organizer with Phil Elsasser and Michael Green, who's over there. So it's a real pleasure to be at the intersection of the global blockchain community and the Colorado blockchain community here today. So I'm here to give a talk about open source software. Open source software is the basis of every technical project that I've ever worked on, both as an entrepreneur and as a student. And I think that open source creates lots of value for the world, and that there's not enough value captured by the software developers who are actually delivering the work that powers the world's economy. And Gitcoin's mission, our reason for being, our North Star, is to right that wrong, to make open source sustainability. When I talk about open source software, I'm talking about software where the source code has been released publicly to the internet. And usually that also means that there's stipulations in the license that there will be royalty-free redistribution of the program for anyone who downloads and uses the program. And then also that modifications to the software will retain the original software license that was put out there. And one of the reasons why we're so passionate about open source software at Gitcoin is that it's just eaten the world. 96% of applications use open source software, according to a recent ZDNet survey. And on average, 57% of code that's in software repositories across the world has been from open source software, including from all of these companies, many of which are brands that you know, recognize, and use every day. $400 billion of value are created by open source software every year. And for the ETH heads in the crowd, that's about 3.5 billion ETH, which is significantly higher than the amount of ETH that will ever exist. And it's all available online for free, which is just really incredible to me that we have this commons that we can use to build our modern internet infrastructure that's all just available. You can pull it down with a Git clone off of GitHub. And it didn't used to be this way. When I first got started in startups, I was the youngest kid on the project. And now it's fun to be in the blockchain space where I'm in my mid-30s and there's a bunch of people in their early 20s and mid-20s. And if you're that age, then you might not remember what it was like in the 90s when Microsoft and closed source software dominated. It's really incredible to have inherited this rich history of the legacy of Linus Torvalds and Eric Raymond and Richard Stallman, all the people who were battling Microsoft in the 90s and fighting for our rights as software technologists have set us up for where we are today in open source software and the blockchain. So I want to talk about what motivates us to work on open source and how that informs open source sustainability. People work on open source for intrinsic reasons. So maybe it's a personal hobby of yours to write Python code or to write a games emulator for your Raspberry Pi. Maybe you enjoy learning how to build open source software and you enjoy the fun culture that's associated with sharing and hobbyists online. There's also extrinsic reasons why you should contribute to open source software. There's a lot of peer recognition that comes from being associated with a really mainstream project. A lot of people I know are really proud when they get a PR into a major project, like a major Python project. There's career advancement that comes along with that peer recognition. And there's also increasingly financial rewards from being associated with open source software. But there's this problem in open source that 65% of open source projects have a truck factor of 2 or less. And so a truck factor basically means like the number of people that would have to get hit by a truck for the project to be dead. So this is just another way of saying that most open source projects, that $400 billion per year in economic value that's created, have a truck factor of less than 2, which means that they have only 2 maintainers. And so when I think about why this is, I think about the life cycle of open source software contributor maintainers. So if you first contribute to open source software and you put it out there, maybe you submit it to Hacker News or it gets an upvote or 2 on Reddit, then you're going to get a lot of comments that are along the lines of, this is so cool, thank you so much for your work, you're providing a lot of value to me. But then increasingly, as you go into actually supporting a production use case with your users, then the conversation becomes a little bit more like this second speech bubble, which is, this is cool, but can you make it do X, Y, or Z for me? And then as you go on and you get to have more and more experience in open source software, you get wider distribution, you're inevitably going to get people who feel entitled to your work in open source software, and they're going to say things to you like, why haven't you fixed this bug? It's been active for 6 months. And it's things like this that lead to contributor burnout. Remember, most open source software contributors are not even paid for their work. They're doing it as a hobby, and they might have corporate support. But that doesn't mean that your problem is their problem. Open source software is put out there for you to draw on, but it's up to you to make it work for your use case. And so I think that this contributor funnel would get a whole lot better if we could manage the time that is spent on open source software as a contributor, and also the burnout that's associated with this open source contributor lifecycle. And so Gitcoin is increasingly trying to be data-driven and market-driven about how we solve this problem. The question that we're asking is, how do we fundle our projects? What an unfortunate acronym fundle is, but it's really important that we find funding for our projects in open source software. And Gitcoin's mission is to explore the cartography of the possibilities in the intersection of blockchain and open source software. So if you think about this from first principles, the way I think about this is that we value open source software. That much is clear. The penetration that open source software has achieved in the world is just huge. And then I think about what blockchain can offer to this problem, and that's that we have programmable money now that can be on immutable blockchain architectures. If we can program our values into our money, can we not create a system such that open source software actually creates value and delivers it back to the people who are delivering that value in the first place? And so I think that from first principles, there should be funding for open source software in blockchain. And then I think that one of the reasons why blockchain is a 10x better place to start a company like Gitcoin is that there's actually funding available for open source software in the blockchain space. And so this is like a white whale that software developers have been chasing since the beginning of open source software. But what's changed, the punctuated equilibrium that blockchain provides, is that there's 100 billion to 900 billion, depending on whether you're in 2018 or 2019, in market cap for software development, in market cap for blockchain. And everyone in these blockchains needs software developers. There's too much capital chasing too few developers. And there's also this increasing tailwind in which all the blockchains, save for a few, are built open source, and everything is built with a remote first culture. Gitcoin's team, for example, I'm in Colorado, Vivek is in Texas, we've got contributors on the East Coast, the West Coast, we've got one in Brazil, we've got one in India, and we've got one in Japan. Work is increasingly done in remote ways. So the construction of Gitcoin is as a double-sided market that connects you, a funder, to open source superheroes, coders, who can turn around bounties or basically open source software. We provide a double-sided market that has a mechanism inside of that double-sided market that allows you to transfer value between the two. And so the mechanism of Gitcoin software product is to allow these funders and coders to do bounties together, to do grants together, to do advertisements to each other. And then in addition to, in the middle, the sort of like mechanisms that we've built, we're starting to accrue liquidity on both sides of the market into our platform. So on the funding side of things, we have money from the ECF and the Ethereum Foundation and consensus grants that needs to be deployed to open source software. And for them, we're a more efficient way of deploying that open source software. For the developer community that wants to work on software that aligns with their values and has an impact on the world and also gets paid, that's a reason to join Gitcoin and to follow along the Issue Explorer to see what issues are available in open source software. This is the way that we think about the product that we're working on. So if you take a random sample of 100,000 users of open source software, which is everyone in this room, only, let's call it 0.1 or 0.01% are actually going to contribute back to open source software, because it just requires a lot of brain power and it's hard to give a shit when you're not getting anything out of it. And then even less people are going to be maintainers of open source software. And so what Gitcoin wants to do is provide a crypto economic incentive, which is just a fancy way of saying a crypto economic incentive to accelerate the flow of users becoming contributors to open source software, and then the contributors becoming maintainers of open source software. So we're going to reduce that truck factor that open source software projects have by accelerating the flow of users of open source becoming maintainers of open source. And I told you at the beginning, our mission is to grow and sustain open source software. This is how we're going to do it. The engineer in me treats this like an optimization problem. How do we get more and more people to contribute and maintain open source software? 5 minutes, okay. Gitcoin's results thus far, we've deployed about 800K in capital to some of the top projects in the space, almost 3,000 transactions. And this is what our mesh network of human beings looks like. So in this 3D graph visualization that I coded up, which is all based off real Gitcoin data, each node in the network is a user that has contributed to the network, and each edge is a transaction that's happened between those users. So you can start to see that there's this community that's forming, and they're all connected to each other in this, what I'm calling mesh network of jobs or mesh network of human beings. So I want to bring home my presentation by talking about the latest project that we're working on to bring open source sustainability to the world. So Gitcoin Grants is basically a decentralized Patreon, which provides recurring revenue for open source projects using EIP 1337, which is the LEET standard, the standard for subscriptions on the blockchain. And basically what we're doing is we're taking Gitcoin Grants and we're pairing it up with a mechanism called constrained capital liberal radicalism, which is basically just this economic theory that Glenn Weil and Vitalik are all about for deciding which projects on a platform to match with funding. So we've got 25K in matching available and 50K in total, which will be deployed to about 30 open source projects. The way CLR works is that if you have, basically this graph shows the total amount of funding that can be raised via CLR matching based off of the number of contributors to the grant. So if you have one contributor who's contributed $275, then your CLR matching will bring you up to $550. But if you've had 10 contributors that have all contributed in total $275, the exact same amount, then you'll have $3,000 worth of matching. So it's basically a bottoms-up way of figuring out where are the projects that the community really cares about and are willing to put their money where their mouth is with respect to funding open source software. And we're doing this live on Gitcoin Grants right now. So I'm very happy to say that in our grants CLR matching campaign, Prismatic Labs has raised the highest amount in CLR matching, 6,000. Moloch DAO has 4,500. Uniswap has 3,300 in CLR matching, and the campaign is ongoing. So there's still time to have your contributions to these Ethereum 2.0 projects that are going to bring us into Serenity by 2/17, which is basically the end of ETH Denver, and you can go to gitcoin.co/grants in order to contribute. I want to leave you with a parting thought. and that's that the world would look much better if open source was sustainable and profitable, and I hope that it's a cause that you'll consider supporting. Thank you.